Olivia, great to see you. So, tell me about that first race. Obviously, much improved result from the first meeting at Zandvoort. So, what went well for you in that first race?
Um, I mean, we just did a good job staying out of trouble again. There was a lot of practice that went into trying to find that race pace, especially through places like turn three with that bank in. It was very difficult to work out how to carry good speed through there. So I've got to really thank Rachel, who's our performance engineer for this season, for turning some laps and really working out what the trick was to race to turn three. You really have to get onto the top line through the early phase of the corner and then hold it up there. It's almost like you diamond it on oval for the first half, but then you just hand that top line around the outside for the rest. So in terms of preparation, it really went well in terms of finding that pace. Qualifying still something to work on, I think. It's never really been my strongest suit. It's always never had to really work hard to find pace over that one lap. Um, but we were able to cut through pretty well in terms of race trim. There was a really big incident in turn three a few laps into the race that I feel like I was very lucky to get away with that damage. Very much just had to find a gap through the cars as they were all sort of sliding down the banking, which is always very tough. So I think overall experience paid off quite a lot there. And then yeah, it was in the end P15 for me, P16 for Sascha. A little bit nervous because of the possibility of P15 becoming a reverse grid pole, but in the end it was 12. So a lot of the field ahead of me shaking up for race two, but I was starting sort of in the middle of the pack where there's not to be as much pressure from behind. So that was quite nice.
Excellent. And you mentioned that the technique through turn three, it's kind of like the oval technique in a way at the beginning of the corner. So, did you obviously think that that experience on iRacing ovals helped you in that sense?
Yeah, it's very tricky because there's sort of one way to approach driving on an oval, where you really need to sort of be patient through the corner entry and make sure the right front tire finds grip again before you put the power back down and try and drive the exit. And obviously, there's similar techniques on road, but it's not something I think about in the same way. And so it was difficult having to context switch and drive most of the track the way I normally drive a road course, but then coming to turn three, using that oval approach, I found really useful. And so having to go back and forth in that every lap was tricky, but we definitely got there by the time we got into the race. So an interesting challenge. I think one of the things that makes this track really fascinating since it was reconfigured back in 2020.
Yeah, so tell me how much you actually enjoyed racing at Zandvoort, because obviously the performance was there, but is it an enjoyable track to drive?
Yeah, I mean, I have experience driving this track in the IndyCar from a few months ago. Loved it in that car. Very much. Uh, I mean, was redesigned to make it viable for high-powered open wheels like Formula One, and so it shines in that car. Of course, I was a little bit worried about how I would do in this race, not because I think it's a bad match for these cars. I think it drives and races great in the F4 car. It's just that typically I tend to be stronger at the more club style tracks in a car of this speed. whereas Grade 1 circuits very much um, you've got to be super smooth in not just in terms of your line, but also in terms of how you battle other drivers. You have to be confident to run too wide sometimes without losing much time, which it's a very tricky skill that the faster cars don't really tend to test all that much. So I'm still learning in terms of that sense, but I think the practice really paid off to get us up to speed and a result better than expected, but also definitely within the hopes of what we could do this week.
And you mentioned that your performance engineer was key to this. Was your spotter key as well in getting you through a few incidents? Because there were a few big ones in race one, weren't there?
Yeah, for sure. I had Rotzi on the stand for me this week, and um, we had quite a lot of chemistry as well, so that was quite nice. And yeah, especially that instant in turn three, uh, because it comes over that crest of turn two, having those eyes in the sky to let you know what's happening ahead of you, came through really helpful. Obviously, in terms of lap one incidents, like we had last week, uh, you're seeing it at basically the same time that they are, so it's very much down to what you can see from inside the cockpit. But as the field starts to spread out and those incidents happen a little bit further up the road, having that voice in your ear to talk you through an incident can really help you not just keep the car in one piece, but also try and stay in touch with the cars ahead, because ultimately big incidents like that can really break up a draft train, and that is a really key part of racing in this car. So you're gonna have a little bit of luck in that sense, but having someone alongside to help you through it definitely is a huge factor.
And why do you think incidents like that are happening? Is it just typical for iRacing, draft racing in this kind of one-make formula? Or is it to do with it being early in the season and people still getting used to the cars?
I think some of it does come down to just how close the racing is going to be in a low-powered car at a track this fast and this wide. Um, I think there's been a lot of netcode early in the season, which have been a little bit unfortunate to see. Obviously, incidents that no driver's really at fault for that just sort of happen because we're all across the world racing. But there's definitely been it's definitely possible to tune that level of aggression to keep yourself out of trouble. Again, very happy for us as a team that we came through with basically no incident this week. Sort of being able to bring home a clean car always gives confidence, and I think being able to do that when other teams aren't able is really where we make those jumps forward in points on positions to then fight for, especially by the end of race two, because of course, with the grid for race two being set by the race one results, if you get into trouble in race number one, that puts you well on the back foot for that second race of the round. And so because we've been able to keep it clean through race one, that's put us in a really good spot to then make those charges forward in race two, where our results get even better.
Fantastic. And so let's talk about race two, because as you said, the results did get even better. So, what was your highlight of race two?
I mean, of course, there were a lot of early incidents that put us into a really strong fighting position. But then it was just a very tight sort of four-car pack throughout. So we were behind an Alpine driver after the first few laps, and was really sort of trying to pressure a way to pick through and try and get after the cars ahead. But it's so tough because through a lot of these corners you can take a very defensive line, and obviously it's not great for overall race pace, but if your goal is to hold the position, then it does a perfectly fine job. But that put us under a lot of pressure because that then allowed the cars behind, there was a Mensa Racing car behind that was able to close up onto the back of the pack and put both me and Sascha under a lot of pressure. There was very much a moment where I could feel my tyres overheating from trying to pick through the Alpine driver, and after running wide through a corner, I sort of let Sascha have the position to let my tyres cool down while she tried to continue the attack. And because of that, I ended up under quite a lot of pressure from that Mensa Racing driver behind. And so I think the highlight was being able to withstand that pressure. There was a big move into turn 1 that I was able to pick through it and pull a switch back to hold the position. And then by the end of the race, we swapped back around. And yeah, a very, very tight battle. So to be able to get through that in one piece and obviously bring home a great haul of points, P12 is the best result the team's had so far this season. And it's definitely a great note to end on this sort of first chunk of the campaign after a sort of safe but not too spectacular start to the campaign last week. To sort of light the wick and bring that pace forward, that aggression forwards to spots on the fringe of the top 10. That is where we want to be all season. And so it puts us in a great spot looking into the break into the next trio of races to really continue that momentum forward and make a charge back towards the Alpines of the championship, the Aston Martins.
And how much of a platform does P12 give you for the rest of the season? Obviously, Zandvoort is a fairly unique challenge. You're now going to go back to British circuits, British club circuits. So does it still build a platform for you and do a lot for the team's confidence, do a lot for your confidence?
Yeah, I mean, it just gives us that reassurance of that we know we can not only run in that pack with these sort of top teams, especially when we get deep into a race, but also that we can have those battles with them and make sure we keep our car in one piece, which is ultimately the most important thing for position in a field that's this tight. Sort of the pace of therefore within like a second per lap in terms of race pace, and because of that, one incident can drop you down 10 plus positions, even if it's only costing you a few seconds and it's a quick spin. So being able to have those battles and come out of them without any issues, that I think is something that brings us the most confidence. And it's just about using this break week to sort of reinforce that, obviously not to burn ourselves out, because that's a huge thing over a campaign over multiple months. You want to make sure you are at the best you can be every time you go to the track. But definitely a time to reflect and to carry that energy forwards into Snetterton and Alton. That's gonna be really powerful for the team, I think.
The usual question at the end of these things. Is there anything that I haven't covered that you'd like to cover?
I guess I just want to make my opinions of Snetterton clear.
Oh, go on.
Because I'm not too fond of the track. So it's an interesting next couple of rounds, because Snetterton is my least favourite track on the schedule. It's one that I've never really quite been able to find a rhythm around. And then Alton Park is my home track and my favourite track on the schedule. One that I can honestly drive with my eyes closed, I feel like, sometimes. So it's going to be really interesting, especially with the points format this season, to attack those back-to-back, because Alton Park, definitely, I think, my best chance to charge for that top 10, which ultimately is sort of the goal of what we want to be pulling off this season. And in previous seasons, that would have been the definition of our season, because that top 10 would get you a couple of points and put you ahead of some of the other sort of midfield teams that are also strapping for that 1 point, that 2 point, those 9th place finishes, 8th place finishes in a couple of rounds. Whereas this season, because of the expanded points format, your consistency is a lot more important, and so I'm still gonna try and bring my absolute A game to Alton Park, of course, because it is it'd be a lot of pride personally, obviously being able to race at my home track that I've visited multiple times. But I also need to make sure that I am putting in as much as possible to Snetterton to try and get a handle on it and to try and get that advantage over some other drivers who also, I feel, might not be too fond of the place, because the difference between finishing 22nd there and finishing 15th there last season was ultimately 0 in the championship. Whereas now, that's a huge chunk of points that is valuable because every race matters for us now.
Yeah,
and so it's going to be tricky, but I'm looking forward to getting a handle on it. It's always fun, sort of conquering one of those tracks that you are challenged by, but then you can sort of make that step forwards.
Yeah, and also you've got the reverse grid lottery as well, which means that if you finish P22, you have no chance of being on pole, but if you finish in P15, you do. So there is that sort of calculus to think about when it comes to finishing positions as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and again, that was P10 was the bottom limit last season for the reverse grid, and so it wouldn't be too much of a difference. Whereas now, that's a huge factor, and I think we saw in race 2 at Zandvoort, the cars that started the race in the top 3, all cars that were running sort of midfield pace in the race itself, I think they all finished in the top 3. They were able to hold on after incidents happened behind them, gave them that chance to make a charge forwards. And so it's definitely a scary place to start, because there is that pressure you have to withstand for the entire race. But if we are fortunate enough to end up in that position, it's a chance for a huge result for the team if things fall our way. And so obviously top 10s are the ultimate goal. Points are a consistent, we want to be there every race, really, if we can. But that threshold of 15th is definitely going to be a focus point from here on out, because we've seen how powerful it can be. And we want it to be as one of those weeks, ultimately.
Yeah, of course. Well, good luck with Alton Park and Snetterton, and I think when we think about Snetterton, it's obviously an interesting track, because, as you say, it's different to so many of the ones that these kind of global program guys will have been racing on. So, How much, actually, even though you dislike the circuit, can that be an advantage to you because you have more experience than maybe someone who's in an F1 academy, for example?
I think it depends on their experience in this series, of course. All of these tracks, apart from Zandvoort, are British tracks, and so the series has been here season after season. And so for anyone who's making their second season, their third season in the series, Snetterton is one of those tracks that they will have that experience in, and they'll be towards the front. But anyone from, say, a Ferrari who are newcomers to the series this season, they might not have that experience. And so I think it'll turn the running order a bit on its head, as opposed to the previous couple of rounds. And that's why we need to really be putting in everything we can to try and take advantage of that, because those points we pick up at Snetterton are worth just as much as the points we picked up this week and the points we pick up at Alton Park and the rest of the campaign.